My ex tried to force me to pay child support, even though we shared custody of our daughter. But in court, the situation turned against her before the judge. There are some things you only learn after losing everything once. When I first joined that online forum, after weeks of waking up at 3 a.m. with my stomach in knots from anxiety, I didn't expect to find anything useful. I just wanted to get my thoughts out before they consumed me completely. But the more I read the stories of other parents in the same situation, the more I realized that what had happened to me was not an exception. It was the rule. I'll tell my story from the beginning because without the beginning, the end makes no sense. Camilla and I divorced 2 years ago, after 11 years of marriage. It wasn't a surprise to me, at least it shouldn't have been. The signs had been there for a long time. The messages she deleted too quickly, the nights she came home late with explanations that didn't add up, the way she looked at her cell phone with a little smile on her lips when she thought I wasn't paying attention. When I confirmed that she was having an affair with Tiago, a guy who worked in the same office as her, I didn't even feel angry. I felt that deep exhaustion of someone who already knew, deep down, but kept pretending not to know because it was easier. What came next was worse than the betrayal itself. When I proposed divorce, Camilla went into war mode. And the weapon she used was Sophia. Our daughter was 7 at the time. She is an intelligent, beautiful girl, with her mother's determination and her father's stubbornness. I loved her with an intensity that was sometimes frightening. I still love her. That will never change. But in the midst of the divorce, Sophia was turned into a chess piece, and it took me too long to understand that. In the first few months, Camilla spared no effort. She took Sophia to therapy, not for Sophia's sake, but to get a report. She filled the girl's head with distorted versions of our separation. When Sophia came back from weekends with me, she would sometimes be strangely cold, answering in monosyllables, as if she had been given a script before getting in the car. Once, with the voice of someone repeating something she had heard from another adult, she said, "Daddy, Mommy said you abandoned us. I had left home. She had stayed. But I was the one who had abandoned her. In that first life, that's how I think of that time as a previous life, I fought tooth and nail for joint custody. I hired an expensive lawyer, gathered evidence, and showed up at every hearing prepared and determined. I was granted joint custody in the final decision. Sophia spent 1 week with me and 1 week with Camilla. On paper, it was fair. In practice, it was a constant war of attrition. What I didn't know, and would only understand years later, was that Camilla never accepted it as defeat. She simply changed tactics. 3 years after the divorce was finalized, when Sophia was already 10 years old, Camilla filed a request for a custody review. She claimed that the child was suffering from the instability of alternating between 2 homes. She gathered reports, statements, and presented herself as the perfect devoted mother. I collapsed. I worked a lot. Traveled for work so often that my lawyer told me it would be problematic in the context of a custody dispute. I lost. Sophia went to live with Camilla full-time. I became the weekend dad. Sophia grew up. I tried to maintain the bond, showing up on all the important dates, sending messages, calling. But Camilla and Tiago, who had moved into their house, filled the space I left. Sophia drifted away. Not dramatically, not with fights. She just became distant, with the quiet naturalness of someone who learns that a door no longer opens and stops knocking on it. On my 52nd birthday, I was hospitalized with a heart attack. Sophia showed up at the hospital. She stayed for 40 minutes, looking at her cell phone most of the time, and before leaving she said, "Get well, Dad," with the same intonation she would use to wish a coworker good luck. I died in that hospital 3 weeks later from a complication that the doctors called unpredictable. The last thing I remember thinking in that ICU bed was, I wasted the wrong life. Then I opened my eyes. It was morning. The room was familiar. The bed was the same one I had slept in for 11 years of my marriage. And Camilla was by my side, sleeping, with that carefree attitude of someone who carries no guilt. I stood there for a few minutes, my heart racing, trying to understand what was happening. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I was 42 years old again. It was 2 months before the divorce I had filed for in that first life. I can't explain what happened. I don't know if it was a dream, if it was something spiritual, if my brain constructed that whole story during a brief lapse of consciousness. What I do know is that when I went back to bed that morning, I remembered everything, every hearing, every message Camilla sent to Tiago, every time Sophia looked at me with that polite distance that hurts more than any open fight. And I knew exactly what I was going to do differently. The divorce happened 3 weeks later. Camilla wasn't surprised by the request, but she was surprised by the proposal I brought to the lawyer. Shared custody. 50% for each of us. No alimony given that we both had equivalent incomes and Sophia would spend equal time with each of us. Dr. Priscilla Ramos, Camilla's lawyer, looked at me with that smile that family lawyers use when they think they have the upper hand. Does my client understand that you intend to maintain shared custody without any additional financial contribution for the minor? I intend to maintain shared custody, I replied calmly. And I understand that shared custody means exactly that, shared responsibility. During the weeks Sophia is with me, I cover all expenses. During the weeks she is with her mother covers them. Camilla crossed her arms. I knew that gesture. It was the prelude to a storm. Raphael, you know very well that it doesn't work that way, she said in a voice that tried to sound reasonable but had that tension underneath. Sophia has ongoing needs. School, health insurance, extracurricular activities. Are you just going to wash your hands of it? I'm not washing my hands of anything, I replied. I'm proposing that each of us take care of our daughter when she's under our responsibility. That seems quite reasonable to me. The look she gave me at that moment carried a question she didn't ask out loud. What happened to you? That was the difference between the Raphael she knew and the Raphael I had become. The Raphael of before would have backed down in the face of that look. He would have sought a compromise, made unnecessary concessions, tried to keep the peace at any cost. Because deep down, he always believed that if he was reasonable enough, generous enough, patient enough, things would work out. I had a lifetime of evidence to the contrary. The meeting ended without agreement. Camilla left with Dr. Priscilla, murmuring something I couldn't hear. Dr. Andre Vasconcelos, my lawyer, looked at me with an expression that was a mixture of approval and concern. She's going to file for alimony, he said when we were alone. You can bet on it. I know, I replied, and I'll be ready when it happens. That night, I picked Sophia up from school. She got in the car with that huge backpack that always seemed too big for her little body and spent some time fiddling with her phone before looking at me. Mom said you guys didn't reach an agreement today. Not yet, I confirmed, but we will. She said you don't want to pay for what I need. I sighed deeply. I had rehearsed this conversation. Sophia, what I want is for each of us to take care of you when you're with us. That doesn't mean I don't want to pay for what you need. It means that when you're with me, I take care of you. When you're with Mom, she takes care of you. Does that seem unfair to you? She was silent for a moment, processing. Then she shrugged with that teenage indifference she was learning too early. I don't know. It's confusing. I know it is, I agreed. But you don't have to worry about it. Your only job is to be a child. She didn't answer, but when we got out of the car, she took my hand. A small thing. Something that in my first life I would have noticed with a twinge of guilt and hope mixed together. Now I noticed it with the certainty of someone who knows that some battles are worth fighting with patience. The court date was set for 6 weeks from now. I already knew how it would end. There's one thing I learned in that first life that no one teaches you anywhere. A good lawyer isn't the one who speaks the loudest in court. It's the one who shows up more prepared than the other side expects. Dr. Andre Vasconcelos wasn't the kind of lawyer who impressed you in the first conversation. Without the shiny suit, without the flashy watch, without that way of entering a room as if gravity worked differently for him. He was a thin man in his early 50s, with thin-rimmed glasses and an annoying habit of pausing before answering any question, as if each word cost money, and he wanted to make sure he was spending it wisely. In my first life, I had hired another lawyer, one who talked a lot, promised a lot, and delivered just enough that I couldn't complain. This time, Andre had been recommended by a coworker who had gone through a complicated divorce and come out of it with his dignity intact. He won't promise you victory, my coworker told me, but he'll prepare you so you won't be surprised. It was exactly what I needed. In the 2 weeks following the meeting with the lawyers, I met with Andre 3 times. Each meeting lasted at least 2 hours. He wanted to know everything: my income, my routine, my history of involvement with Sophia since birth, doctor's appointments I had taken her to, school meetings I had attended, weekend trips, dated photos, saved messages. You have much more than you think, he said during our second meeting, leafing through the copies I had brought. The problem is that most parents don't document anything because they think they won't need it. Then they arrive in court with no proof of anything. I know, I said simply. He looked at me over his glasses. It was the 3rd or 4th time I had responded so briefly, as if I already knew what was coming next. I think he found it strange, but he didn't ask any questions. Camila, as Andre had predicted, filed for child support 10 days after our first meeting. Dr. Priscilla's argument was that shared custody did not eliminate the need for child support, especially considering that I earned approximately 30% more than Camilla. The logic was simple. Unequal income, proportional financial obligation. On paper, it sounded reasonable. It was exactly the argument I needed them to use. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in September, at 2 p.m., at the Second Family Court. The judge was Dr. Fernanda Castello, a name I didn't know at the time, but whom Andre described as meticulous, impatient with poorly founded arguments, and completely immune to drama. When I entered the courthouse hallway that morning, Camilla was already there with Dr. Priscilla. She was wearing a navy blue blazer, her hair tied back, looking like someone who was prepared to be taken seriously. Tiago didn't come, which surprised me slightly. In my first life, he showed up at everything, always one step behind her, like living proof that she had moved on and I hadn't. Camilla saw me, held my gaze for 2 seconds, and looked away. Dr. Priscilla didn't even bother to look. Andre arrived right on time, black briefcase under his arm, expression neutral. We greeted each other with a handshake and went in together. The courtroom was small, as they usually are. A long table, 2 chairs on each side, the judge's bench slightly higher at the end. A clerk typed without looking up. There was a smell of old paper and air conditioning that I will forever associate with that period of my life. Dr. Fernanda Costello entered without ceremony, sat down, opened her briefcase, and read silently for about 30 seconds before looking up. "We have a request for child support in the context of shared custody," she said in the flat voice of someone who has read that sentence hundreds of times. "Dr. Priscilla, you may present the grounds for the request." Camilla's lawyer stood up with the confidence of someone who believes they are on the right side of the story. She began with the argument of income difference. "I earned more, therefore I had greater contributory capacity, so it was reasonable and fair that I contribute financially even in shared custody." She added a statement of Sophia's monthly expenses: private school, health insurance, swimming lessons, English lessons, school supplies. The total was significant. "The minor has an established standard of living," argued Dr. Priscilla, "and maintaining that standard depends on the proportional contribution of both parents. The fact that there is shared custody does not exempt the parent with the higher income from their child support responsibility." Dr. Fernanda wrote something down. "Dr. Andre?" My lawyer stood up slowly. "Your Honor, the defense does not dispute that the defendant has a higher income than the plaintiff. This fact is documented and is not in dispute." A pause. "What we dispute is the premise that this difference in income in itself justifies the setting of child support in an effectively shared custody arrangement." He opened his briefcase and distributed copies of a document to the judge and the opposing table. "What we have here is a survey of the defendant's involvement with his daughter over the last 18 months, accompanied medical appointments with receipts and dates, school meetings with attendance lists, proof of direct payment of tuition, school supplies, and extracurricular activities during the weeks when the minor was in his custody." Dr. Priscilla leafed through the copies with an expression she tried to keep neutral, but which remained tense around the edges. "In addition," Andre continued, "we requested from the school a record of both parents' attendance at school activities. The document is on page 17. There was a silence as the judge turned the pages. I knew what was on page 17. I had spent hours organizing it. Over the past 18 months, I had attended 73% of Sophia's school activities, to which both parents had been invited. Camilla had attended 61%. It wasn't a huge difference, but it reversed the narrative. The defendant is not arguing that the plaintiff is a negligent mother, Andre made clear, anticipating the objection he saw forming on Dr. Priscilla's face. He is arguing that both are present and involved parents, with sufficient income to cover the expenses of their respective weeks of custody, and that, therefore, the setting of child support is not supported by the concrete facts of this relationship. Dr. Fernanda looked at Camilla for a moment, not with judgment, but with the clinical attention of someone putting together a puzzle. Then she looked at me. "Do you have anything to add directly?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, standing up. "I want to make it clear that I am not opposed to contributing financially to my daughter. I never have and never will. What I do object to is the idea that shared custody means that one parent pays and the other manages. When Sophia is with me, I pay. When she's with her mother pays. That's true shared responsibility." Camilla, on the other side of the table, took a deep breath through her nose. I knew her well enough to know she was holding something back. It didn't take long for it to come out. "Your Honor," Dr. Priscilla stood up again. "We would like to present an additional argument." She opened another folder. "The defendant, in the last 6 months, has taken 5 business trips, totaling 22 days away from Sao Paulo. On some of these occasions, Sophia had to stay with her mother for weeks that would have been with her father, without any financial compensation for this additional period of responsibility." It was a good argument. I knew it was. I had been waiting for it. "Dr. Andre?" The judge looked at my lawyer. Andre already had the document in his hand before he stood up. "The defendant's business trips are documented," he confirmed. "And on each of the 5 occasions mentioned, the defendant transferred to the plaintiff, in advance, an amount corresponding to Sophia's estimated expenses for that period." He distributed more copies. "Proof of transfer on pages 21 to 26. The amounts were agreed upon informally between the parties via text message." Those messages are on page 27. I saw Dr. Priscilla look at pages 21 to 26 with an expression I could only describe as that feeling of stepping on a stair you didn't know was over. Camilla leaned over and whispered something in the lawyer's ear, something that made Dr. Priscilla close her eyes briefly for a second, because what was on page 27 were the messages. Messages from Camilla confirming receipt of the amounts. Messages from Camilla saying, "Okay, we'll manage here." And in one of them, sent on a Friday night when she was clearly in a good mood, a message that said, "Honestly, Raphael, you're the only father I know who sends money in advance before traveling. Most disappear, and don't send anything." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't definitive proof of anything. But it was Camilla, in her own words, contradicting the narrative that Dr. Priscilla had constructed over the last 20 minutes. Dr. Fernanda Castello read page 27 carefully. Then she read it again. Then she put her pen down on the table and looked ahead for a moment, with that expression of someone who is carefully choosing what to say next. "Dr. Priscilla," she said finally, "would you like to rephrase any point of the argument you presented earlier?" The silence that followed lasted perhaps 5 seconds. It seemed much longer. There is a kind of silence that only exists in a courtroom. It is not the silence of someone thinking. It's not the silence of when no one has anything to say. It's the silence of when everyone in the room understands at the same time that something has changed, and no one wants to be the first to move for fear of confirming what is happening. It was this silence that filled the room for a good 5 seconds after Dr. Fernanda asked Dr. Priscilla that question. Camilla's lawyer was good. I have to be fair about that. In another situation, with a less prepared opponent, she would have come out of that moment unscathed. But she had built her argument about the trips with a confidence that assumed the other side would not have any documentation. And now she was holding a folder with 27 pages that dismantled that argument piece by piece. "Your Honor," Dr. Priscilla finally said, her voice controlled like someone who has learned not to show that she is improvising. "What the documents presented demonstrate is precisely the defendant's goodwill in specific cases. This does not eliminate the need for a formal and predictable structure of financial contribution. It was a decent recovery." It turned the documentation Andre had presented as contrary evidence into an argument in favor. Look how well he acts when he wants to. Imagine if he had a formal obligation. Dr. Fernanda wrote something down without changing her expression. "Understood. Let's continue." I wrote on a piece of paper and slid it toward Andre. "She's going to try the standard of living now." He read it, made an almost imperceptible gesture with his head, and said nothing. And that's exactly what happened. Dr. Priscilla opened a new section of the argument with the caution of someone who is changing ground after realizing that the previous one was shaky. The new angle was Sophia's standard of living, the private school she attended, the premium health insurance, the swimming and English lessons she had been taking for 3 years. The argument was that this standard had been established during the marriage when the couple's combined income was higher and that maintaining it depended on a proportional contribution from the father, given that he had greater financial capacity. The child cannot be penalized for the end of her parents' marriage, she argued. The standard of living to which Sophia is entitled has been built up over years and cannot simply be discontinued because the parent with a higher income decides that shared custody means no financial obligation. It was an emotionally powerful argument, the kind that works well when the person across the table is a mother or father who has never documented anything, who arrives in court on the defensive, who blushes when someone mentions their child's name in the context of a dispute. I remained silent. I looked straight ahead. I breathed at a normal pace. Andre stood up. "Your Honor, the defendant fully agrees that Sophia should not be penalized for the end of the marriage." Pause. "For this reason, I would like to present a breakdown of the expenses actually paid by the defendant in the last 12 months, broken down by category." More copies. I had spent 3 nights organizing that spreadsheet. Each line had a date, amount, category, and corresponding receipt. School. I had been paying half of the tuition directly to the institution by automatic debit, linked to my account for 2 years. Health insurance. I kept Sophia as a dependent on my work plan, which covered consultations, exams, and hospitalizations at no additional cost to Camilla. Swimming. I paid the monthly fees for the months Sophia was with me. Camilla paid for her months. English, ditto. "What the spreadsheet shows," said Andre, "is that the defendant not only contributes, but has already structured this contribution in a direct and documented manner. The relevant question, Your Honor, is not whether he contributes. It is whether there is a financial gap that justifies additional alimony." Dr. Fernanda analyzed the spreadsheet for what seemed like a long time. Then she looked at Camilla. "Are you aware of these direct payments?" Camilla hesitated for a second. "Yes, Your Honor." "And would you contest any amount or item presented in this spreadsheet?" Another second of hesitation. Dr. Priscilla leaned slightly toward her, but Camilla answered before the lawyer could intervene. No. It was just one word, but it was the right word to confirm what the documents already said. I knew Camilla. She wasn't backing down out of kindness or sudden honesty. She was backing down because she knew that contesting those numbers would be worse than confirming them. Andre had put together the documentation in such a way that any challenge would be easily overcome, and contesting and losing would be more damaging to the narrative than simply confirming. Dr. Fernanda made another note. Then she looked up. I would like to hear both sides on a specific point before proceeding. She opened her folder to a page that only she could see. The difference in income between the parties is approximately 30% in favor of the defendant. In joint custody case law, this difference, in isolation, is not necessarily sufficient to establish child support when both parents have income and both bear expenses during their respective periods of custody. A pause. However, there are expenses that are not easily divided on a weekly basis. School supplies purchased once a year, occasional medical expenses, school trips, uniforms. She looked at Andre. Does the defendant have any proposals for this type of expense? It was the opening I had asked Andre to wait for. Yes, Your Honor, he said. The defendant proposes the creation of a joint account for Sophia's extraordinary expenses, with monthly contributions from both parents proportional to their respective incomes. The defendant would contribute 60% of this fund, the plaintiff 40%. Any extraordinary expense would be paid from this account upon presentation of proof without the need for case-by-case discussion. Dr. Fernanda looked across the table. Dr. Priscilla. Camilla's lawyer spoke quietly with her client for about 15 seconds. I couldn't hear them, but I could see the body language on both sides. Camilla's shoulders were raised, that posture of resistance that I recognized from afar. Dr. Priscilla spoke in a tone that seemed more like an explanation than a consultation. The plaintiff would need time to evaluate the proposal, Dr. Priscilla finally said. Of course, said Dr. Fernanda. We'll suspend for 15 minutes. In the hallway, Andre stayed by my side while Camilla and Dr. Priscilla moved away toward a more private corner. It's going well, he said quietly. She's going to reject the proposal, I replied. He looked at me. Why? Because accepting the proposal means admitting that the proposal is reasonable. And if the proposal is reasonable, then the original alimony request was excessive. She'd rather keep fighting than admit that. Andre was quiet for a moment. Have you been through this before? It wasn't a question I expected. A divorce? Yes. No, he said slowly. This specifically. You anticipated each of their arguments with a precision I rarely see in clients. Usually people come here angry or afraid. You came with a dossier. I didn't answer right away. Outside, in the glass-enclosed hallway, I could see other people with other problems, other files, other stories that the court would turn into numbers and decisions. I learned the hard way that you can't trust things to work themselves out, I finally said. So I prepared myself. Andre nodded, as if that were enough. When we returned to the room 15 minutes later, Dr. Priscilla announced that the plaintiff did not accept the joint account proposal. The grounds for the original request were upheld. I didn't smile. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would feel. I just registered the information with the neutrality of someone who already knew. Dr. Fernanda continued the hearing with the same flat expression as always. But I noticed something subtle at that moment. She had stopped looking at Camilla with the attention of someone putting together a puzzle. She was looking at the documents. When you have the right documents, you don't need to convince anyone of anything. The documents do the convincing. The second part of the hearing was more tense. Dr. Priscilla changed her strategy. If the numbers didn't work, she would try the emotional approach. She asked Camilla to speak directly. Your Honor, the plaintiff would like to supplement the arguments with some observations about Sophia's routine. Dr. Fernanda nodded. Camilla stood up. And there, for the first time since the hearing began, I felt something that wasn't strategy. It was that old, familiar feeling of seeing my daughter's mother and remembering that underneath it all, underneath the divorce and the lawyers and the messages deleted too quickly, there had been a real life. She spoke for about 4 minutes. About Sophia waking up at 6:30 every morning. About the therapy the girl was still doing on Wednesdays to deal with the transition of the divorce. About the time Sophia got sick during a week that was supposed to be with her father, and Camilla was alone with her at 2 a.m. with a fever of 101 because Raphael was away on a business trip and she had no one to call. It wasn't a lie. It was a true I crafted to tell a specific story. But it was true. Being a mother doesn't have a set schedule, Camilla said, and her voice trembled slightly on the last word in a way that I wasn't sure was calculated or genuine. It doesn't end when the week is over. Sophia calls me when she's with her dad. She texts me when she's scared at night. You can't divide that up in a spreadsheet. There was a silence after she sat down. Andre looked at me briefly. I passed him a note. He read it. He nodded. When he stood up, his voice was softer than before. Not combative. Thoughtful. Your Honor, the defendant acknowledges everything the plaintiff has described. Motherhood has no set hours, and neither does fatherhood. A pause. Sophia also calls her father at 10 o'clock at night when she's with her mother. She also sends him messages when she's scared. The defendant has these messages saved, but did not present them because he does not think it should be necessary to prove that his daughter has a bond with him. He placed a single sheet of paper on the table. What we do present is the record of a video call at 2:20 a.m., during the trip mentioned by the plaintiff, in which the defendant stayed on the line with Sophia for 43 minutes until she fell asleep while her mother treated her fever. Camilla looked at the sheet. Then she looked at me. It wasn't anger I saw on her face. It was something more complicated. The recognition of someone who realizes, perhaps for the first time, that the person across the table is no longer who she believed them to be. Dr. Fernanda placed her pen on the table. I'm going to close the hearing for today, she said. The decision will be handed down in 10 business days. We left in silence. In the hallway, while Andre put the documents in his briefcase, Camilla approached. Dr. Priscilla stayed a few steps behind, respecting the space. You saved the record of that call, Camilla said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. I save everything, I replied simply. She stared at me for a moment. Why? Distrust? I shook my head. Protection, there's a difference. She opened her mouth to say something and closed it again. Then, with that directness that had always been one of the things I genuinely admired about her, she asked, You've changed, Raphael. What happened to you? It was the same question she had asked with her eyes at the first meeting with the lawyers. This time I left it open. I've learned to defend myself, I said, and walked away toward the exit. Outside, the September sun beat down on the courthouse sidewalk. Andre walked beside me for a moment before speaking. The decision should be favorable. I can't guarantee it, but the investigation went very well. I know, I said. Do you also know what you're going to do with 10 days to wait? I paused for a second. I thought of Sophia, who was at school that afternoon, oblivious to what had happened in that small room that smelled of old paper. I thought about how I was going to pick her up at 5 p.m. and hear about her day without mentioning the court. And I thought of Beatrice. I had passed the shelter's door 3 times in the last few weeks without going in. I had the address written down. I had Dona Marilia's name. I even had a photo I found in a newspaper article about a reading competition the shelter had organized, a girl with dark eyes and a serious expression holding a small trophy with both hands. I have a visit to make, I said to Andre. He didn't ask where. He just nodded as if it were the most natural answer in the world. I got in the car, entered the address into the GPS, and set off toward a part of the story I didn't yet know how to tell. But I knew it was time. Part 4. The shelter was located in a neighborhood that the city had forgotten to modernize. It wasn't an abandoned place. It was a place that had simply stopped in time, with those low houses with faded walls and trees that grew crooked because no one had remembered to prune them when they were young. The address took me to a cobblestone street where the GPS lost confidence and started suggesting turns that didn't make sense. I found the number on the side of a green-painted iron gate with a small wooden sign with handwritten letters that read, Lar São Lucas. I stayed in the car for about 2 minutes before getting out. It wasn't exactly nervousness. It was that strange feeling of being about to do something that cannot be undone. Because I knew, with that clarity that only exists when you have already lived the consequences of not doing something, that entering that gate would change something. I didn't know exactly what yet, but I knew. I got out. I rang the bell. Dona Marilia was a woman in her 60s with short gray hair and a kitchen apron that had clearly been taken off in a hurry because it was still crooked on her shoulder. She looked at me through the gate with that silent assessment that people who deal with vulnerable children develop as a survival mechanism. Who is this? What do they want? And should I trust them? Good afternoon, she said. Are you Rafael Mendonça? I am. I received your email. She opened the gate. Come in. I had sent an email 3 days earlier. Formal, direct. I explained that I was the father of a 10-year-old girl, that I was in the process of getting divorced, that I knew of a child in the shelter named Beatrice who had been mentioned in a newspaper article about a reading competition. I said I would like to discuss the possibility of foster care, perhaps adoption, depending on how things developed. Dona Marilia took me to a small room that served as an office, with a table covered with papers and 2 plastic chairs outside the table. On the wall was a board with photographs of children of different ages, some surrounded by families, others alone with that smile of someone who has learned that photos require a smile, but has not yet learned why. Beatrice is 9 years old, said Dona Marilia, sitting down. She's been with us for 3 years. Her parents lost custody due to serious neglect. There are no relatives on record who are able to take her in. A pause. She's a smart kid. Very smart. Sometimes that complicates things. Complicates how? Donna Marilia clasped her hands on the table. She reads too fast. She asks questions that adults don't know how to answer. She has already been through 2 adoption processes that did not work out. In the first, the family thought she was difficult. In the second, she hesitated briefly. The family gave up after 2 weeks of living with her. They said she was cold. I remained silent. She's not cold, continued Donna Marilia, and there was a gentle protectiveness in her voice. She's careful. There's a difference. Children who have been disappointed too many times learn not to get attached quickly, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much and don't want to feel for nothing. I recognize that, not in myself, but in someone I hadn't met yet, but who already existed in my memory in a way I couldn't quite explain. Can I meet her? I asked. She knows you're coming. Donna Marilia stood up. I gave her the option of not coming if she didn't want to. She came. Beatrice was in the shelter's library when we entered. It was a smaller room than I had imagined, with 2 shelves of disorganized books and a long table where 3 younger children were drawing. Beatrice was sitting in a chair near the window, with an open book on her lap. She looked up when we entered, assessed me for a full 2 seconds, and then looked at Donna Marilia as if silently asking if I was really who she was expecting. Beatrice, this is Raphael, Donna Marilia said simply. Beatrice carefully closed the book, marking the page with a folded piece of paper, and stood up. She was small for her age, with dark hair tied back in a ponytail that was coming loose on one side. She wore a uniform from the shelter that was clean but a size too big for her. She held out her hand. I shook her hand. Rafael Mendonça, she said, as if confirming something she had memorized. You have a daughter named Sofia. You are an engineer. You are getting divorced. I looked at Donna Marilia. She smiled slightly. I told you she does research. Research what? I asked, looking back at Beatrice. Everything I could find, she replied with disarming naturalness. Before I meet someone new, I prefer to know who I'm talking to. That way I'm less surprised. There was something in the way she spoke, that adult precision in a child's face, that made me understand what Donna Marilia meant when she said that intelligence sometimes complicated things. Not because she was difficult, but because it disoriented people who expected children to be simple. May I sit down? I asked. She considered it for a second. You may. I pulled up a chair and sat down at her level. Donna Marilia stood near the door but did not participate, leaving the space to us. Do you have any questions for me? I asked. She looked at me with an expression I could only describe as calibration. I do. But first I want to know why you want to adopt. The real answer, not the one people give because it sounds good. I was silent for a moment. She waited, unhurried, with the unusual patience of someone who has learned that answers that come too quickly are usually rehearsed. Because I understand what it's like to invest everything in a relationship and discover that the other person wasn't investing in the same way, I finally said. And because I believe that some people deserve someone in their corner. You seem like that kind of person. Beatrice looked at me. That was honest. I tried to be. Most people say they want to adopt because they want to give love. She tilted her head slightly. Love is easy to say, it's harder to show up when it's not convenient. I agree. You travel for work. I do. Often? 5 times in the last 18 months. She processed the number. And when you travel, who takes care of Sophia? It depends on the week. If it's her week with me, my mother stays with her or she stays with her mother. Sophia has a stable routine. What if I were with you when you traveled? It was a direct, practical question, completely devoid of sentimentality, and that was exactly why it was the right question. My mother would stay with you. Or we would find a solution that made you comfortable. You would have a say in it. She considered it. You say, would have a say, but the final decision is yours. Yes, I'm the responsible adult, but having a say isn't the same as making the decision. Your opinion would matter. Beatrice was quiet for about 10 seconds. Then she looked at the closed book on her lap. I'm on chapter 17, she said, as if changing the subject. It's a book about a girl who discovers she has a brother she didn't know existed. They meet when they're already adults. A pause. I find it curious how people can grow up in parallel without knowing about each other. It wasn't a change of subject. It was her continuing the conversation in a different way. Sophia doesn't know I'm here today, I said. I know. I've done enough research to understand that you wouldn't do that without being sure first. She looked at me. Are you still not sure? I'm sure I want to get to know you better, I said honestly. Complete certainty takes time, for anything worthwhile. She nodded slowly, as if that answer had passed some internal criterion that I didn't have access to. "Can I show you my room?" she asked. "I have some books you might not know." Beatrice shared her room with another girl who wasn't there at the moment. Her bed was identifiable from a distance. It was the only one with books organized by size on the shelf above the headboard. On the nightstand was a hardcover notebook, a ruler, and a small photo in a plastic frame. I looked at the photo frame without touching it. It was a photo of Beatrice, younger, with an elderly woman smiling in that way that grandmothers do, which needs no explanation. "My teacher from my previous school," she said, noticing my gaze. "She gave me the book I'm reading. She's dead now." She said this as naturally as she had said everything else. It wasn't indifference. It was a particular way of carrying things. "Do you miss her?" "Every day," she said simply. "But missing her doesn't change anything, so I read the book and keep the part of her that I can still have." I sat on the edge of the bed, with the silent permission she gave me by stepping back to make room for me. She stood near the bookshelf, running her finger along the spines of the books with the gesture of someone checking that her friends are still there. "You've tried adoption before," I said. "Twice." She stopped her finger. "You've also done your research," Donna Marilia told me. "What did she say?" "That the first family found you difficult, that the second gave up after 2 weeks." Beatrice had her back to me for a moment. When she turned around, her expression was the same as before, but there was something slightly more restrained about her, like a door that was 2 centimeters less open. "The first family wanted a child who would be happy with little. I just didn't show it the way they expected." A pause. "The second family had a 7-year-old son who broke my math notebook. When I told his mother, she said I needed to learn to share." "And you left?" "I didn't go anywhere. They sent me back." She said the word "sent" without drama, but with a precision that made its weight even more present. "There's a difference." "There is," I agreed. "And that difference matters." She looked at me for a long moment. "Why?" "Because it's one thing to choose to leave. It's another thing to have no choice. The two things leave different marks." Beatrice was quiet. Then she pulled a book from the shelf and handed it to me. It was a book on mathematical logic for young people, its title worn from being handled so much. "Can you solve the problem on page 42? I opened the page. It was a conditional probability problem presented as a story about a train with passengers and destinations. Complex for a 9-year-old. In the margin of the page were notes in pencil, written in small, neat handwriting. "Are these your notes?" "It's my problem-solving process," she said. "I always write down the reasoning, not just the answer. The answer may be wrong. The reasoning shows where." I looked at the notes more closely. The process was correct. So was the answer. "You solved it," I said. "I know," she replied. "I wanted to see if you could follow along." I looked up from the book and found her watching me with that calibrating expression again. And there, in that small room smelling of old books and a September afternoon coming in through the half-open window, I understood what Donna Marilia meant. Beatrice wasn't cold. She was a girl who had learned, the hard way, that people come in with promises and leave without warning. So she tested them, not with drama, not with difficult behavior. She tested with direct questions and math problems and silences that were exactly the size of a doubt. And I knew, with that strange clarity that had accompanied me since I woke up that morning 2 years ago, with a lifetime of memories that shouldn't exist, that I wasn't going to disembark. "Can I come back next week?" I asked. She considered it with her characteristic seriousness. "You can." "And can I bring Sophia?" A longer pause this time. "Does she know about me?" "Not yet, but I'm going to tell her." "How do you think she'll react?" It was an honest question that deserved an honest answer. "I don't know. She's still getting used to a lot of things, but I think you two have more in common than it seems." Beatrice looked at me with that expression I was beginning to learn to read. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't disagreement. It was her filing away the information to check later. "All right," she said finally. "But if she comes, I want it to be her idea. I don't want it to be a surprise." "Agreed," I said. When I left the shelter that afternoon, the sun was already low and the GPS had finally accepted that the cobblestone street existed. I sat in the car for a minute before starting the engine. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Sophia. "Dad, what time will you be home?" I made brigadeiro with Grandma Teresa, and she let me use the stove by myself. I smiled. I typed, 15 minutes, save one for me. 3 dots appeared. Then, I saved 2, but I already ate one, sorry. I started the engine. I had a conversation ahead of me that I didn't know exactly how to begin. But I knew one thing. Sophia needed to hear about Beatrice from me, honestly, without beating around the bush, before anything else happened. Because Beatrice had asked for that. and asking for that was a sign of trust. And trust, I had learned the hard way, was the only thing that could not be given back. Part 5. There are conversations that you rehearse for days, and that, when the time comes, turn out completely different from what you planned. This was one of them. I arrived at my mother's house a little after 6. Donna Teresa was in the kitchen with Sophia, both wearing aprons. The counter covered with cocoa powder and condensed milk, and that happy mess of someone who cooked with pleasure and not in a hurry. Sophia saw me come in and held up a brigadeiro with the seriousness of a trophy. "This one is yours. This one is my backup in case yours falls on the floor." "Impeccable logic," I said, and she laughed. The three of us had dinner at my mother's small kitchen table, which was where all the important conversations in my life had taken place for as long as I could remember. Donna Teresa asked about the hearing with the careful discretion of someone who wants to know, but doesn't want to scare anyone. I told her the essentials without going into details that Sophia didn't need to hear. "It went well," I said simply. "The decision will be made in 10 days. My mother nodded in her usual way of saving her relief for later, when she was alone. Sophia ate her brigadeiro in silence and then asked, without looking up from her plate, "Will the judge decide that you have to pay alimony to Mom?" I paused. "Probably not." "Why not?" "Because custody is shared and I already pay half of everything directly. It doesn't make sense to pay again." She was quiet for a moment. "Mom will be angry." "Maybe. Will you be okay anyway?" I looked at her. 10 years old, with cocoa powder on her chin, and that expression of someone who asks the right question but is afraid of the answer. "I'll be fine," I said with conviction. "And so will you." She nodded, not entirely convinced but willing to believe. It was there, with Donna Teresa pretending to be very interested in washing the dishes, that I knew it was time. "Sophia, I need to tell you something." She looked at me. "Over the last few months, I've been thinking a lot about the future, about our life, about how I want it to be from now on." I chose my words carefully without rushing. "I visited a shelter today, a place where children who have no family live." Her silence had the texture of total attention. "There's a girl there named Beatrice, 9 years old. She's very smart, likes math, reads a lot." I paused. "I'm thinking of adopting her." Sophia stared at me for a moment that seemed long. Then she said, "Do you want to trade me for her?" It was the question I knew was coming. "No," I said firmly. "You are my daughter. That doesn't change anything. There is no trade happening here." "Then why?" "Because there is a child who has no one on her side, and I am in a position to change that. And because having a sister doesn't mean having less of a father, it means having more family." She frowned. "Sister. If things work out, it's still too early to tell." "Have you met her?" "Today, and..." "She's an interesting person," I said. "I think you'd like her, but that's up to you. I won't introduce you to her unless you want me to." Sophia was silent for a long moment. Donna Teresa had completely given up on the dishes and was leaning against the sink with her arms crossed, looking at me with that motherly expression that says you're doing well. "Don't mess it up." "Does she know about me?" Sophia asked. The same question Beatrice had asked, mirrored, without knowing about each other. "Yes," I said. "She asked me to tell you before anything else. She didn't want it to be a surprise." Something changed slightly in Sophia's expression. It wasn't exactly approval. It was a curiosity she was trying not to show completely. "She seems boring," Sophia said. "Why?" "Someone who asks not to be surprised is probably very organized." "Yes," I confirmed. "Very." Sophia took her second brigadeiro, the one she had reserved as a contingency, and bit off half. "Can I think about it?" "Take as long as you need," I said. She nodded, chewing with the seriousness of someone processing something too big to fit into a dinner conversation. Donna Teresa waited for Sophia to go to the bathroom to wash up and then approached me at the table. She put her hand on my arm. "You're different," she said quietly. "Since the divorce started. More determined." "I've learned a few things." "From whom?" I smiled without answering. She knew me well enough to know that when I didn't answer a question, it was because the answer was too complicated, not because I was hiding something bad. "That girl from the shelter," she said. "You've made up your mind, haven't you?" "Not yet, but I'm working on it." "And Sophia?" "Sophia will get there in her own time." Donna Teresa looked at me for a moment. "Your daughter is more like you than you think. She just needs time to process before accepting what she already feels." The following week, Dr. Fernanda Castello's decision arrived via the court's electronic system on a Thursday at 2:12 p.m. Andre called me before I opened the document. "Favorable," he said, and there was restrained satisfaction in his voice. The judge denied the child support request and ruled to maintain shared custody under the proposed terms. She also recommended that the parties formalize the joint account proposal for extraordinary expenses, but did not make it mandatory. I was quiet for a moment. Raphael? I'm here, I said. Thank you, Andre. It was your work. I just organized it. After I hung up, I sat at my desk with the document open on the screen for about 5 minutes without reading it. It wasn't the feeling I expected. In the previous weeks, when I imagined this moment, I thought I would feel something big, dramatic relief, euphoria, that intense satisfaction of someone who finally wins a battle that has lasted too long. What I felt was quieter than that. It was the feeling of closing a door carefully, not slamming it, closing it. I sent a message to Donna Teresa. Favorable decision. She replied with a heart emoji and then with, come to dinner on Sunday. I didn't send a message to Camila. Andre would take care of the formal communication, but Camila called me anyway that same afternoon at 5 p.m. I answered without knowing exactly what to expect. I read the decision, she said. Her voice was controlled, but with that underlying tension I knew so well. Congratulations. It wasn't about winning, Camila. What was it about then? It was about being fair. She was silent for a moment. Priscilla said we can appeal. You can, I agreed. It's your right. Aren't you going to try to convince me not to appeal? No. It's your decision. Another silence, longer this time. Sophia told me about the girl at the shelter. That wasn't what I expected her to say. Beatrice. Yes, she told me. A pause. Are you really going to adopt her? I'm working towards it. And Sophia? Sophia is processing it. I'm not going to force anything. Camilla was quiet for a while, which made me think that maybe the call had dropped. Then she said, in a voice that was slightly different from anything she had used in that conversation, less guarded. You've changed a lot, Raphael. People change. Not like that, not in such a short time. A pause. Sometimes I wonder if I ever really knew you, or if you've become someone else. It was a question that didn't expect an answer, and I didn't give one. Anyway, she said, returning to a more neutral tone, I'll talk to Priscilla about the appeal. I haven't decided yet. All right. Take care of Sophia. I always have, I said. She hung up without answering. 2 Saturdays later, Sophia asked me to go to the shelter. It wasn't a dramatic statement. It was during breakfast, between one piece of toast and another, with that forced naturalness of someone who has rehearsed the phrase but doesn't want it to sound rehearsed. Can you take me there? To the shelter. I want to meet her. I can, I said. Whenever you want. Today. In the car, Sophia stared out the window most of the way there. Near the shelter, she asked, what do I say to her? Whatever you want. What if I don't have anything to say? Silence is also a way of being together. She looked at me sideways as if I had said something that was both obvious and new. Donna Marilia welcomed us with that discreet smile of someone who has seen a lot but still gets excited about the right things. Beatrice was in the outdoor courtyard when we arrived, sitting at a table with an open notebook. She looked up when we approached, assessed Sophia with that characteristic attention, and then looked at me briefly as if checking something. Sophia, said Beatrice, not as a question but as a confirmation. Beatrice, replied Sophia in the same tone. The two looked at each other for a second. Do you really like math? Sophia asked. Yes, don't you? I find it boring. You probably had a bad teacher, Beatrice said with conviction. Math isn't boring. It's the only thing that doesn't lie. Sophia frowned with that expression of someone who wants to disagree but doesn't have an argument ready. Can I sit down? Beatrice pushed the chair next to her with her foot. I stood about 3 meters away, watching. Mrs. Marilia approached and stood next to me. She came, Donna Marilia said in a low voice. She asked to come, I corrected her. The principal nodded, satisfied with the difference. For the next hour, I watched the two of them. They didn't talk nonstop. They didn't have that immediate chemistry of people who become best friends in 5 minutes. But there was something happening that was more real than that. Beatrice showed her problem notebook. Sophia complained that she didn't understand half of it. Beatrice explained an exercise with a patience that surprised me. Sophia made a mistake. Beatrice didn't comment on the mistake but pointed out where the correct logic was. Sophia did it again and got it right. Neither of them smiled much, but neither wanted to leave when I said it was time. In the car on the way back, Sophia was quiet for about 10 minutes, then she said, She's weird. Yeah. But in a good way. A pause. She explained math without making me feel stupid. Usually when I don't understand something, people have that look of forced patience on their faces. I know that face. She didn't make that face. I stayed quiet, letting her get to where she was going at her own pace. Dad. Yes. You can adopt her. I didn't say anything for a moment. Are you sure? No, Sophia said with that direct honesty I loved about her. But I think so. And when I'm not sure but I think so, it's usually because I've already decided and just haven't admitted it yet. I smiled without her seeing. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet. I'll probably still find her annoying. Probably, I agreed.